Hello, welcome to Plan to Protect with Melodie Bissell, the safest podcast on the internet. I am Melodie Bissell, the president of Plan to Protect and the co-author of the bestseller Plan to Protect, a protection manual for children and youth, a protection manual for those that work with them. Today, our guest is Diane Roblin-Lee. I met Diane 13 years ago when we met at a little tiny tea room in Brooklyn, Ontario. I met a soul sister at this little tiny tea room. We had an amazing conversation and we found that we had so much in common. But you'll hear more about that in a few minutes. Diane is an author, she's a speaker, she's an entrepreneur, and she is a mother and a grandmother. Welcome, Diane.
Thanks, Mel. It's always such a delight to be with you.
I love spending time with you. So we are meeting today because we want to tell you just a little bit about Diane's story and some of the books that she has written. But before we get into this topic, Diane, tell me a little bit first about your family. I want to say that I know that the pandemic has been really hard on you. During the past few months, Diane recently lost her husband from the pandemic. And Diane, this is the first time you and I've really talked since you lost Morgan. And I just want to tell you that you are a brave soul. I'm so sorry because I know that you and Morgan just had a precious life together the last few years. And I'm so sorry that you lost him to the pandemic.
Oh, well, thank you, Mel. To just give our viewers a little bit of background on the family, I was married for 38 years to a man who basically ended up to be a stranger, and discovered after those 38 years that he was a child molester. He confessed to molesting children, one of whom was my granddaughter, my precious granddaughter. And being a grandmother yourself now, new grandmother.
1 week.
You can get a little bit of understanding the heart of a grandma. And so the marriage blew up at that point, of course, and he went to prison. But I had two sons from that marriage who are now 50 and 47 years old, one of whom is a grandpa himself now. And so I have 6 grandchildren of my own and 3 great-grandchildren now. And then when I married Morgan, Morgan had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. So we had 5 between us and 17 grandchildren between us. So, so it ended up to be a big, wonderful family. And I just thank God for my family.
Well, I have been a grandmother, as you know, now for 1 week. We welcomed our little grandson into the world just a week ago. And I am a very proud grandma. I'm sure I'm going to have to get Josh to put a picture up of baby Kai as part of this podcast. But yes, grandchildren are very, very precious. All right. So, Diane, this is such a heavy topic, but you have honored this topic by transforming your story into something that can benefit all of our listeners and individuals around the world. So you wrote a series of booklets, and I've got them right here. They're called Predator Proof Your Family. Just amazing little booklets. It was an honor for me to write the preface of each of these booklets. The incredible amount of research and writing that went into these. Thank you so much for that. But before we get into the book, tell me what motivated you to write this series of booklets called Predator Proof Your Family.
Well, as you can imagine, when all this came to light, when my ex-husband confessed, it was the most shattering thing that you can imagine. My precious family was just torn asunder. It was like we were it was a bag of popcorn, and we were all so devastated and traumatized and shattered by revelation that he was a child molester and had done what he did. It was like one piece of popcorn ended up in France, one ended up out in BC, one down in everybody just scattered. We were just so devastated. And, I think normally you would think of a family pulling together, but it's so individually shattered all of us that everybody just scattered. So I ended up on my own for 7 years. There were actually people who wondered, not my family, but there were other people who wondered if I had known about it. How can you live in the house with someone who's molesting a child and you don't know? So it was very shattering.
I think initially, if I'm correct, when you first heard it, you didn't even believe that it could have happened. And I think
Well, no.
after being married to somebody that long, you'd have trouble believing it.
Well, one of the problems was that, as I found out later, there was incest on many levels that I didn't understand. And so we had gone through the revelation of incest with my husband's father, who had molested one of our kids. So when we found out about that, of course, we went through the whole process of restoration with one of our kids. And so my husband was totally aware of what of the devastation that happens with molestation. And so because we had gone through this trauma together, I trusted him implicitly. And it never entered my mind that he would do that himself. It just didn't. It just didn't. As a matter of fact, I thought that he was kind of immature. Well, he was younger than I, and I thought he enjoyed the company of kids more than adults, and so, but I saw him putting himself into situations that looked suspicious. But I thought that he was stupidly putting himself into those positions without realizing what it was appearing like to other people. But I trusted him. So I was constantly trying to protect him from what other people might be thinking.
Before we get into the booklets, Diane, I know a number of years have gone by now. How is your family doing today?
I would like to say that everybody has all come back and we have Christmases together and everything is good. Um, I can't say that. We have come a long, long way. But there was one point where my granddaughter was totally estranged from me for 3 years. That was very painful. And this year on Easter Sunday morning, I got a note from her, and we have been reconnected since then, and it's been wonderful. But it's been a process. Child molestation, people who haven't experienced it either themselves or with their family, just don't understand the layers and layers and layers of ramifications of child molestation. But, having said that, I would like to speak to the restoration too, because I want to bring hope to people who are going through this and who are going through perhaps estrangement and just all of those things that that there is healing, and healing isn't always best. healing can be slow, but as it comes, it sure is a huge relief.
And it's encouraging to hear stories of healing. As you know, I'm working on my doctorate right now, and it is on the spiritual healing of victim survivors of child sexual abuse. And I've had the privilege of hearing some of those stories, and just even hearing your story, and seeing the the beauty that can come of such ashes and so much pain just speaks to what is possible. So let's talk about your booklets for just a moment, if I can. The first booklet is called Why All the Fuss? Um, Diane, do you think there's an over exaggeration of the prevalence of the impact of child sexual abuse?
I wish that I could say yes, and I cannot say yes because the prevalence, well, the advent of the internet, of course, changed everything with child sexual abuse. And of course, there has been incest and child sexual abuse since the dawn of time, you know. But with the internet, everything changed because people used to get pornography in, you know, little brown paper packages that, you know, would come in the mail, I guess. And but now with the internet, pornography is so accessible, and it has been found that in studies that when people are charged with internet pornography, 35 to 40% of them are actively involved in active child molestation, in acting out. And so it's sort of like the Trojan horse, really, of the 21st century, I would say, because it has come into homes. Porn addiction is a real thing. It's Dr. James Dobson called it the new crack cocaine. And I think that that's very appropriate. I talk about the pornographication of society and what that has done to the mind of people, and the prevalence is just exploded. And there are so many levels of that explosion too, in terms of the financial aspects of child sex trafficking.
I think whether we're talking about the lead, or even in this case with pornography, or even child sexual abuse, individuals become dissatisfied and hunger for more. And
Yes.
that's why, as you were saying, individuals that are engaged in child pornography on the internet end up engaging in it in real life. And I know that it's not just limited to males, there's also females engaged in child pornography and child sexual abuse. So, one of your booklets is called Who is a Predator? I know in your case, you were living with a predator and you didn't even recognize it. You didn't recognize the signs. Is it possible to stereotype a predator, or are there key things that we should be looking for?
Well, the thing is that every predator is different, you know, because every person is an individual. And so you can't, it's sort of, there's not a cookie cutter for a predator. But there are key things that you can recognize. In my booklet, Who is the Predator? It's number 2 in the series. And I have in there a whole great list of characteristics and signs to watch for. And no predator is going to exhibit all of those signs. But if you are concerned about somebody and you go down through that list and you see that they have a lot of those signs, then it's time to watch, to be careful and to keep your eyes open. And, you know, I think there's a big thing about the gut. We're given this gut thing where some people would call it discernment. If you have a feeling that is off about somebody, then you need to really pay attention to that. And I did have that feeling about my husband. I felt, my ex-husband, I felt like I knew there was something wrong. There was something wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And because I trusted him so implicitly, I I couldn't nail that down. But I would say to anyone now that if you have something stirring in your gut about somebody, it's time to really, really pay attention and try to figure out what the source of that discomfort is, and ask questions and dig with your questions. Don't be afraid to dig with your questions. For instance, when I was living with my first husband, we had a great big house. It was 4,000 square feet. It was a gorgeous place to raise kids. We had 50 acres of land and so on, and a woods beside. It was wonderful. But in my bedroom upstairs, I had a Chesterfield at the foot of the bed. It was a huge room. And there was a television up there. And when the kids used to be at my place, I would have, they would often go up into my room and they would, watch television sitting on the Chesterfield up there. And there were a few times when I went into the room and the child who was abused, I'm not going to identify her, but she would jump up and run into the washroom. And I thought it was as though she was nervous or something. And she would be sort of startled when I would come into the room. And I thought that was kind of funny, but I never ever thought, well, now I know that what that was her hearing footsteps coming and not wanting to be vulnerable and running away before something could happen. That breaks my heart to think about that now. But if knowing what I know now, what I would have done then was questioned her and really tried to get at why she was feeling startled or nervous, and because that was normal.
So, what tips would you give to parents? I mean, both of us have grown children now. We have grandchildren. What tips would you provide to parents for predator proofing their children?
I've given an extensive list of tips in the third booklet, number 3, proofing our children, and basically they boil down to just being very present in your children and your grandchildren's lives, being very present, being very hands-on in their raising, being very aware of what is around them, and being educated. I would say be educated about child sexual abuse, because there were things that I didn't understand. For instance, the grooming process. Predators generally are in no rush. And what they do is they try to gain the trust. Of course, you have different situations of child sexual abuse. You can have a child who's grabbed in a mall, but I'm talking about the majority of situations where a child is in a situation where someone gains the trust of the family and the child. And that can take time. It can take a year. It can take 2 years. But often they will choose, they will try to look for some vulnerability. For instance, stepchildren are in a little more possible danger. Foster children are often are often very vulnerable. The predator will look for a child that is perhaps a little more vulnerable than the others. For instance, a middle child often has less attention on them than the baby or the eldest. And so they will have more of an opportunity with that child. So they'll build trust there, and then they will build the confidence of the parents so that everybody will be asleep at the switch, and they will have more opportunity. And perhaps the time will come when there are two, when there are whole family is going off somewhere, and there's, cars are going to be crowded if everybody goes together. And so at that point they can say, oh, I'll take so and so, do you want me to take them? And then you end up with possibly with a child who's been abused. But just understanding that grooming process, that is extremely important, so that you can see if there's anyone around you who is maybe developing a little bit too much of a relationship with a particular child. You know, it's difficult because there are wonderful, wonderful people in this world who will try to develop a special relationship with your child just because they have wonderful things to input into that child's life, and they see the potential in the child for good things or for giftings or talents or whatever. And so you don't want to eliminate those wonderful people, but to leave a child alone for periods of time with a person who has developed a real focus on that child, it's just not wise. It's just not wise. If someone sees, for instance, if your child is doing really, really well on the piano, and say it's a piano teacher or whatever, and what I'm saying is the child can learn the piano as well with that teacher, with you there, or by putting, safeguards up. The other thing that I think is very, very important in that regard, how can you expect a little child who is in the middle of a very traumatic situation to tell you what's going on if they've been threatened? you know so we can't put the responsibility for identification of a predator on a child. You just can't.
And I know that most children that are abused by someone they know. They say almost 95% of
That's right.
individuals, like children that are harmed by someone that they know, someone that they trust. And I agree with you that it's so often children that are at higher risk, parents that desperately need help and respite care. Children with disabilities have a significantly higher chance of being abused than a child that does not have a disability. And it just breaks my heart to think that at the point where they're the most innocent and vulnerable and they need safe people in their lives, people take advantage of that. Diane, I've had a lot of clients that have asked me of all the booklets, which one is my favorite. And I'll tell you, the one of the ones that was the most difficult for me to read was the porn factor, because we've already established that often, the overload of pornography that is out there, and especially child pornography, the impact that can have on a child being abused. One of the booklets that was really one of my favorites is the booklet called It's All About the Brain. And I've also done some research on this topic and just the impact with domestic violence and neglect and emotional abuse, and how that can trigger cortisol in a child that can cause real long lasting impact on a child. I'd like to talk to you about this book because there's so much research that went into this. And can you share with the listeners the impact our brain has in relation to this topic, not only what goes in and behavior that can be a result of it. But even for a child that's been abused, what impact has the brain for that young child long term and even short term?
I have done a tremendous amount of research in this area, and I would like to credit Dr. Carolyn Leaf with her work in this area. It's amazing what she has discovered, and it was so eye-opening for me. But yes, we are basically created with body, soul, and spirit, and we have this amazing control center here, our brain. And so for a child who has been abused, or a predator, or someone who a potential predator, it's all about choice. And we have the choice of how to develop our brains. Our brains are plastic, they're malleable, and they can be changed. They don't have to be hardened into bitterness and perversion. They can be basically changed, and the change comes through repetition. For instance, if you have a child who is very hurt and confused and feeling alone and betrayed and all of those things, the child needs help. For a child to develop that, to train the brain to be a victor instead of a victim is tremendous. But also for someone who has soaked their brains in pornography, they still have the choice. They can still train their minds not to be a predator. Just because they have these pornography soaked brains doesn't mean that they have to go out and and abuse a child. And some people will say, oh well, so much has to do with the DNA. If one person is a predator, then that means the next and the next. No, you cannot. Every person has the has choice between the ears. You choose how you develop as a person. You train your brain, and as you put new thoughts, and you can develop new neural pathways to change your brain. It's absolutely fascinating. But in terms of healing and prevention, it's huge, because you don't have to stay the way you are. We have all heard of drug addicts whose lives have been transformed because they've retrained their brains. We've heard of people who are paralyzed and they gradually learn to walk because they retrain their brains. They retrain their control centers. So that whole thing, the brain is huge in terms of child molestation and healing.
Well, we're coming to the end of our podcast today. I know we're running out of time here, but Diane, your books are excellent. I know a number of them um, really have a strong faith component to it, and you speak to smart justice and predators in the pews and pulpits. Smart Justice is another one of my favorites. I recommend that to so many of our clients, especially faith-based organizations that have predators in, their pews and want to be able to welcome them, show grace to them. However, they need to put parameters in place so that they're not giving access to children. I have one more question for you, Diane, because I'm often asked this question. Should we just not forgive, especially in a faith environment? I hear people say, well, shouldn't we just forgive people? They've done their time, they've done time in jail. Your husband did time in jail. Now he's out of jail, your ex-husband. Should we just not forgive and believe that this is never going to happen again? What would you say to our faith sector listeners that are wondering about where grace and forgiveness comes into place within a church setting if you've got a predator in your pew?
Well, uh, absolutely. We need to forgive. But Jesus never asked us to be stupid. And so I think if a predator comes out of prison and they want to live a totally new life, and they say that they are going down a different track now and so on, they need to have the chance, because they need to be encouraged in positive directions, so that they won't get so discouraged that they will just reoffend and go back into prison. We want to help them to grow, but at the same time, we need to protect our children. So in Smart Justice, I worked with Dr. Dean Bursey on an agreement that the predators would sign if they wanted to be part of a church, and if they honestly want to redesign their lives and whatever, then they're going to be concerned about the people around them. They're not going to be wanting to be a threat to people around them. They're going to understand that mama halfway back is concerned if her little boy goes out to the washroom, and you do too. So that's not going to work. So there are protocols put into place that the offender will sign in order to be part of that organization again. And if he's genuine, he or she will be happy to sign that. So we ourselves absolutely need to forgive, but we also need to recognize the fact that sometimes people slip, sometimes they fall, and you don't want another child to go through a lifetime of having to unravel all of the cords that are tied around them as a result of child sexual abuse. So we absolutely need to forgive. We also need to be smart, and that's why I called that booklet Smart Justice.
It really is an excellent booklet, and I've given it away so often. We have put that offenders covenant in place and have recommended it to so many of our clients to have some kind of offenders covenant in place. Diane, I just want to thank you so much for participating today. I really want to encourage our listeners to get a copy of all 8 of the booklets. And then Diane has also written another booklet called The Husband I Never Knew. Those are all available on our bookstore at plantoprotect.com. They're also available, I believe, through Amazon and through some of your favorite booksellers. Am I correct, Diane? And on your website, they're available. Diane, do you have any final thoughts or words for our listeners today?
Yes, I absolutely do. And that is to commend you, Mel, for the work that you do. I am just blown away by what you do. And, the fact that I think it's over 7,500 organizations, isn't it now, that Plan to Protect is in putting in place protocols and so on for organizations, churches, schools. You have been tireless, Mel, in just plodding from one place to another, protecting one organization at a time. And I applaud you. I thank you. I value you so much. I thank God for the day that your father actually introduced me to you, and that was just so amazing how that was all put into place. And I commend you. I just bless you, and anything that I can do to help or to strengthen your work in any way, I'm here.
Thank you so much, Diane. I want to thank our listeners for listening to this podcast today. It has been sponsored by Diane's booklets, and those are available on our bookstore. As I said, I really encourage you to purchase a copy, give them out as Christmas gifts to the families that you have in your sphere of influence. I think every family should have a copy of these booklets. I think every library should have a copy of these booklets. I wish I knew years ago what I know today. I wish these books were available when my children were young. Diane has recommended that we ask questions and that we open up our eyes to the dangers that our children face. And let's really do everything we can in our power to protect children. Diane, thank you so much for participating today. Thank you again for the work that you did in research and writing these booklets. And I look forward to times that we can continue to work together in the future. Bye,
Absolutely.
everyone.
Bye.